Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 16085 in the name of Jackson Carla on behalf of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee on inquiry into the A9 dualling programme. I invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Jackson Carla to speak to and move the motion on behalf of the committee. Around 9 minutes. Mr Carla.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. One of the frustrations of opening for the committee is I can't just freewheel in my usual style. I actually have to sort of adhere to a text, which is very frustrating. But can I begin by moving the motion in my name on the subject of this afternoon's debate, which will be familiar to many colleagues across the chamber. However, it's not one that I was directly involved in prior to convening the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Inquiry into the A9 dualling programme, other than as a semi-regular user of the road itself. As convener of the committee, I'd like to begin by putting on record once again my thanks to Laura Hansler, because every petition has its origin in a member of the public who comes to us with an issue that they wish to have us pursue. And we do so without fear or favour, with no manifesto underpinning it, but to challenge and represent the petitioner's concern. She joins us in the public gallery today, and I thank her for bringing forward the petition calling on the Scottish Government to fulfil its 2011 promise to dual the A9 between Perth and Inverness, which provided the catalyst for our inquiry. And I commend Ms Hansler for her commitment to this issue over a long number of years, including through the forthright and powerful evidence she provided directly to the committee, as well as faithfully attending to observe the evidence we heard from past and present Scottish Government ministers and officials, about which I'll say more shortly. Now, the petition was lodged in December 22 and includes a call for completion of the dualling work by 25. And as members will be aware, before we had the opportunity to even consider the petition, the then Minister for Transport, Jenny Gilruth, announced that the 25 completion date was simply no longer achievable, unquote. That announcement in February 23 and initial evidence we gathered from the petitioner, from the Civil Engineering Contractors Association and from Transport Scotland led to the committee taking the unusual step of elevating its consideration of the petition to the level of an inquiry. And throughout the inquiry, the committee sought to explore the circumstances which led to the 2025 completion date becoming unachievable, as well as considering ongoing challenges which may impact on the successful dualling of the A9 by the Scottish Government's new target completion date of 2035. Now, in doing so, we gathered evidence from those with technical and industry expertise, people and businesses affected by issues along this arterial route, and from those who held the highest positions of government. The committee is grateful to all those who have contributed to our consideration of this matter, whether in person or in writing, including the former First Ministers Humza Yousaf, Nicola Sturgeon and the late Alex Salmond, whose final appearance before Parliament was to this committee, and from the many political parties who sought to give evidence to the committee during its inquiry, which I have to say excluded the Scottish Greens. I also thank the clerks and all parliamentary staff who have supported the committee throughout this process, as well as officials at Transport Scotland, for the volume of evidence that was made available to the committee when we requested various documents relating to the A9 dualling programme. None of us, yes, of course.
Fergus Ewing.
Does Jackson Carla agree that the committee not only looked at what went wrong, but also how to put things right in future? And in that respect, the evidence that we heard from Graham Barn, the CEO of the body that represents 80% of civil engineering companies in Scotland, was extremely helpful in the detail of his recommendations about how procurement might be done more effectively in future.
Jackson Carla.
I hope to say more about that, and I'm quite sure Mr Ewing will not miss the opportunity to do so himself, because he, like I, will of course have been slightly surprised when the documents we received from Transport Scotland turned out to be about 18 inches thick. So it was quite a bit of reading and digesting, even if quite a lot of them turned out to be redacted. A special thanks should also be offered to Edward Mountain, who attended many of the evidence sessions and contributed to our deliberations in his role as reporter from the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. Now, while the extensive evidence we considered did not uncover, in the parlance of the day, a smoking gun that suggested that the government had somehow acted in any way maliciously, it didn't suggest that at all. But what did become clear to the committee was that a lack of clarity over the availability of funding resulted not just in a failure to deliver this project on time, but that the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland's unwillingness to be open and transparent about the challenges being faced has also damaged public trust in the government's ability to deliver the dualling programme. Our committee is no stranger to public concerns about the government's approach to major roads projects. We continue to examine them through a number of petitions. Transparency in Transport Scotland's decision-making processes is a recurring theme. And while we look forward to inviting the Cabinet Secretary to the committee in due course to discuss a number of those petitions relating to roads that are in hibernation in different parts of Scotland, it may be worth reflecting on how past experiences, such as the lack of open external discussion of delays and drift on the A9 dualling programme, has negatively impacted public perceptions of Transport Scotland. As our report makes clear, the delays experienced are quite frankly unacceptable for those who live and work in the north of Scotland. And whilst a revised date for completion of the project has been announced, the news of a delay to the expected completion of the Tomatin to Moy section leaves us unconvinced the lessons of the past have been learned. Now, we are particularly grateful for the candid evidence provided by the Civil Engineering Contractors Association, who told us that its members regarded Transport Scotland, and I quote, as the worst client to work for in the UK. Now, it's possible that opinion may have softened with a change in Transport Scotland's approach to procurement contracts, which will now see a greater balancing of risk between the Scottish Government and contractors. CACA Scotland praised Transport Scotland for taking the large leap to change its procurement approach, with a number of bids for the Tomatin to Moy section, an encouraging indication that contractors are content with the new form of contract. It's to be hoped contractors now have a more positive view of working with Transport Scotland, as it did become increasingly clear to us that due to the scale of civil engineering work planned for Scotland, specifically the north of Scotland, over the next decade, it will not just be the availability of funding that determines whether the Scottish Government can deliver its commitment to the A9, but also the availability of a workforce to carry out the construction of the remaining sections as competition among industry to undertake these projects continues to rise. To put that into context, we heard that the north of Scotland can expect to see around £20 billion worth of investment from SSEE in the next 5 years, with a further 20 to 30 billion being invested by Scottish Power, Network Rail and others in major projects across Scotland in the course of the next decade. They need the road to be completed to fulfil their obligations to those projects, but those projects will also be looking for the same workforce to complete their projects as we require for this one. Now, the Scottish Government have told us that they consider market capacity when developing the updated A9 delivery plan, and there are those who would like to see the Government take a more flexible and responsive approach to market capacity with a view to accelerating the dualling programme should there be a capacity in the construction and engineering sector to do so, which is why I think we're a little disappointed by the rejection in the last short while of any plans to accelerate the current programme. Nicola Sturgeon reflected during her evidence to the committee on whether the Scottish Government were as candid as we could have been with ourselves as well as with the public about just how challenging it would always have been to meet the 2025 target. And we know from our work in this inquiry that there are those who feel the Scottish Government should have been more candid about progress or the lack of on dualling the A9. Laura Hansel has commented that part of the reason for bringing forward her petition was to challenge the very people responsible for the unforgivable lack of transparency surrounding the non-delivery of the dualling programme. And perhaps the Cabinet Secretary could respond to those who feel there has been a lack of transparency up to now and set out what steps are there in hand to change that. In a previous Parliament, I had the pleasure to serve as convener of the Fourth Crossing Bill Committee, which colleagues may recall was established to examine the construction of what we now refer to as the Queensferry Crossing. And during the course of the A9 inquiry, I invited reflections from others, from former First Ministers and from Ministers, on how the existence of a cross-party parliamentary committee looking at a major project did help provide an impetus to help uncover solutions to difficult otherwise that perhaps ended up in drift. That was a legislative requirement for the Queensferry Crossing, so it's for Parliament to decide whether that's a route to look to in the future. But I think it undoubtedly helped maintain a focus on a project which, after all, was eventually delivered on budget and on time. Taking this step would, as our report suggests, support the rebuilding of public trust and confidence that the commitment to fully dual the A9 between Perth and Inverness will be delivered. Finally, can I say the whole committee has had an opportunity to consider the Government's response. We are slightly disappointed. We feel that this was an opportunity to reflect, to reset, to reboot and to restore public confidence that we won't have a Parliament of MSPs in 2035 having this debate, having had another inquiry into why we still don't have a completed A9. I therefore still encourage the Cabinet Secretary to seize the moment and the opportunity of this report and do all she can to ensure public confidence is there and that this road is delivered.
Thank you. I now call on Fiona Hislop, Cabinet Secretary, around 8 minutes, please.
I want to start by thanking all those who contributed to the committee's work on this inquiry, arising from its consideration of petition PE 1992 lodged in 2022. In my response to the committee issued on the 9th of January and in my covering letter and again today, I welcome the consideration that the committee has given to forward-looking issues relevant to future progress of the dualling programme. Now, much has changed in the period since the committee began its consideration of this petition, and its report recognises that. In December 2023, the delivery plan for completion of the A9 dualling programme was announced. This plan involves procurement of 4 design and build contracts, as well as, subject to further decision-making in late 2025, procurement of 2 mutual investment model or MIM contracts. Now, this approach was supported by a Cabinet decision to prioritise completion of the A9 dualling programme within its budgets. Now, since the announcement of that plan, the Government has made good progress, including commencing procurement of the Tay Crossing to Ballanoe project in May 2024, awarding the contract for the Tomatin to Moy project in July 2024, publishing orders for the Killiecrankie to Glengarry and Dalradi to Slough projects, and progressing land acquisition processes for the Tay Crossing to Ballanoe, Pitlochry to Killiecrankie, Glengarry to Dalwhinnie and Cribbenmore projects. Now, I'll say more of the progress that has already been made and the further progress expected during 2025 in my closing speech. Now, I'd like to move on at this moment, please. On Tuesday this week, Transport Scotland published a report on the assessment of rescheduling and acceleration proposals for the A9 dualling project, which was an issue that the committee referred to in its report. Now, based on the assessment findings, the report did not recommend rescheduling or trying to accelerate the dualling programme, although it did recommend that further assessment be made of the potential for an advanced works contract at Downham Spiddle Junction, which I've asked Transport Scotland to take forward. Now, it should be borne in mind that the potential rescheduling opportunities are limited. The first 2 contracts of the A9 dualling programme have already been constructed and are operational. The third contract reached contract award in July 2024, and contract award for the 4th contract is expected in summer 2025. So rescheduling is therefore only feasible in respect of the 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th contracts, which are due to start procurement in summer 2025, winter 26-27, summer 27 and winter 28-29 respectively. However, as the 7th of these, the Pass Burnham to Tay Crossing, is already scheduled to start at the earliest date possible based on the expected date of completion of that project's statutory processes, and is not dependent on any other project, any change of date would mean delaying completion from the date currently expected. So in practical terms, the scheduling options are therefore limited to the timing of procurement and construction of the 5th contract, Pitlochry to Killiecrankie, the 6th contract, the A9 North MIM contract, and the 8th contract, the A9 Central MIM contract. So in a second, I'll come to you shortly, Mr Ewing. The report published earlier this week shows that rescheduling and reversing the procurement sequence of the 6th and the 8th contract would be expected to result in a delay of around a year in the overall completion date of the dualling programme. Now, this is due to the need to delay procurement and construction of the 5th contract to avoid an overlap that the current delivery plan has been developed to avoid due to road user disruption implications. Now, these changes in procurement sequence would also reduce continuity of the bidding pipeline of these projects, making them less likely to be attractive to bidders. And I appreciate there are a range of views on how completion of the dualling programme should be achieved. And on that note, I'll take an intervention from Mr Ewing.
Fergus Ewing.
The Tomatin Moy section was announced by Michael Matheson in February 2021. It won't be completed until 2028. So it will take 7 years from start to completion. There's 8 remaining sections. 8 times 7 is 56. Doing the sections one by one and using the traditional procurement method rather than the framework method surely is almost guaranteed to see the mistakes of the past repeated. And can the Cabinet Secretary say, in the consideration of the request that was made by all parties except the Greens last June at the meeting we had with yourself, the First Minister, what actual consultation was there by Transport Scotland with industry about how to accelerate the project in practice, given it is them who will deliver it?
Always through the Chair and Cabinet Secretary, I'll give the time back.
Some time back, thank you. I think there's a number of points in there. I know, because Fergus Ewing has attended the briefings that I have provided on the A9 project, the idea that they're one by one, no, the whole point is that there's going to be concurrent work happening across the A9. So there'll be work happening in the south of the A9 at the same time as there's work on the north of the A9, and the processes for those will be happening simultaneously. And that is why actually trying to reorder the current scheduling would have an impact, because there would be dangerous concurrent issues that would have an issue on price, but also uncertainty of delivery. And certainty is something that the committee was very keen on. Now, I believe that the report that we've put forward demonstrates that the plan established and published in December 2023 is robust and practical to undertake this large programme of works in the years ahead. We remain fully focused and committed to delivering what will be 50% of the A9 between Perth and Inverness dual by the end of 2030, 85% by the end of 2033 and 100% by the end of 2035. Now, as I noted in my response to the committee, the Government considers that many of the committee's conclusions and recommendations in its inquiry report relate to two main themes, transparency and certainty. And I hope that the various activities that I've outlined in my response demonstrate the action that we are taking both in transparency and certainty. I'm wholly committed to progressing the programme, listening to keeping Parliament and local residents and businesses informed and engaged. We have regular meetings, there are newsletters, there's a new A9 dualling website. And I've noted the committee's recommendation regarding the establishment of a new parliamentary committee. Now, the Government is very clear that this is a matter for Parliament to determine. The Government will, of course, direct its reporting to whichever committee is appropriate, which is currently the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. The first of the 6 monthly update reports to that committee was issued on the 21st of November 2024, and I've written to that committee on 6 other occasions with updates. Now, on the use of MIM contracts for the 6th and 8th contracts to be procured, it is essential that there is a sound evidence base for decision making on that issue, in line with requirements of the Scottish Public Finance Manual, the Treasury Green Book. And work on this has already started, involving updating cost estimates, undertaking further market consultation with contractors and financial investors, updating the outline business case for the programme, undertaking the necessary assurance reviews of that work. There's continuous engagement with contractors, as you might appreciate. Now, once these activities have been completed, Ministers will be in a position to determine whether or not the current delivery plan intention to procure 2 MIM contracts will be confirmed. The Government will then ask to make a statement to Parliament to set out the conclusion of the further decision processes. And I want to be very clear to Parliament about the Government's position on this work. If a decision is taken not to make use of MIM contracts on the A9 dualling programme, we would implement an alternative approach, such as the use of capital-funded design and build contracts, and there is a Cabinet decision to prioritise the completion of the A9 dualling programme within Scottish Government budgets. So since I'm about to close, but if I've got time, yes.
Briefly, Jackson Carla.
I note the commitment to come forward with a statement following consideration of matters at the end of this year. The commitment is to bring forward a statement not necessarily this year, but potentially into next. And there is obviously just the concern that the Parliament at that point will be maturing. Is the Cabinet Secretary certain that we will be able to have proper scrutiny of any decision that does come forward at that late stage?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not sure where times came from in terms that the statement would be into 2026. That would be a matter for Parliament. I'm actually very keen to move things forward, so I would take responsibility to try and bring it to Parliament in such a state that obviously there can be proper accountability, which I think should be required in such a major decision that would be being taken at that time. So in conclusion, if I can, since December 2023, I've been updating and will continue to update Parliament and local MSPs of progress, design and development of the different sections involve engagement and input from local residents, businesses and communities, and with Tomatin and Tomoys construction work starting in earnest following preparatory works that have already started in the autumn. There will be continuous dualling work until 2035. And I would reiterate what I said to Mr Ewing, most often with work on more than one site at any time on the A9, and I trust that can be recognised in contributions today.
Thank you. I now call Maurice Golden, around 7 minutes. Mr Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. As a member of the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee, can I thank all of those who have participated in this inquiry and those who have supported the committee in its work, as well as, of course, the petitioner, Laura Hansler. I would also like to recognise and pay tribute to all of those who have tragically lost their lives on the A9 over the preceding years and decades. I maybe drive on the A9 north of Perth a couple of times a year. When you drive that road, there is always a slight sense of unease, something that you don't experience on other roads. And almost without fail, you will see something: a car pulling across the carriageway with barely enough time, or a tight overtaking manoeuvre. There will always be something that makes you take a deep intake of breath. But for the communities that live near and rely on the A9, driving on that road is not something they have to deal with a couple of times a year. For some, this is a daily experience. And it's taking its toll on these communities, emotionally, economically, and tragically, with far too many people seriously injured or worse as a result of road traffic incidents. The reality is that these communities have been badly let down by the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland in their handling of the A9 duelling. And this is why the findings of this inquiry are important, because these communities deserve answers, and we owe it to them and to all future users of the A9 to learn from the failures of the past and to ensure that this project now moves forward. And if the Scottish Government can do this, then they can begin to rebuild the public's trust. Unfortunately, in reviewing the Government's written response to the committee's report, it is far from clear the degree to which they are willing to accept and learn from the failings of the past. And when you look at these failings, the Government's approach to transparency has been seriously lacking and contributed significantly to the current state of the project. Even when ex-First Minister Nicola Sturgeon accepted this, she said to the committee, "I would ask myself whether we were as candid as we should have been with ourselves, as well as with the public, about just how challenging it would always have been to meet the target." And when we look at transparency, we have to look at the timelines. It was February 8th, 2023, less than 2 years ago, when the Scottish Government came clean and said the 2025 completion date was no longer achievable. There is a massive disconnect between saying less than 2 years ago that it would not be complete by 2025 and now saying it won't be completed until 2035. And within the last couple of days, Transport Scotland have doubled down on this and said that the 2035 timeline cannot be accelerated, effectively claiming that any attempts to accelerate the project might slow it down further. This seems like a staggering and bizarre claim, but if it is the case, then this just further points to the degree in which the Scottish Government deceived the public by keeping up the pretence until 2 years ago that the project could be completed this year. And whether the Scottish Government is willing to accept this or not, the reality is that either hanging on to the 2025 timeline for so long was an attempt at deceit, or the revised and immovable 2035 timeline is an attempt to deceive. So which one is it? Of course, it could be both. The Government have acted in bad faith for too long, and going forward, we can have no more deceit. We need an evidence-based and transparent timeline, and we need parliamentary scrutiny. The committee was clear that the government had evaded scrutiny in the past, and in reading the government's response to the committee, it appears they are trying to water down the role of parliamentary scrutiny going forward, and have dodged the question of establishing a committee that could oversee the dualling of the A9 and other major projects.
Cabinet Secretary.
Already accountable to the Parliament. I answer questions, I respond, I have given statements, and I will continue to do so. I report to the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. It would be wrong for the government to tell Parliament what to do in carrying out its scrutiny and accountability responsibilities, and I and anyone else related to this will absolutely respond and be accountable to the relevant committee. And having been the Deputy Convener of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee under the convenership of Edward Mountain, I know that's a very strong committee, and I'm happy to do that. But if the committee and the Parliament decide otherwise, but it's the Parliament's decision, it should not be actually the government's decision to decide who we are accountable to. That actually is not how Parliament works.
Interventions, I think, will need to be slightly brief, although we've got a bit of time in hand. I give you the time back, Mr Gold.
Well, the member will be aware I sat on the Parliamentary Bureau, and I'm aware of the voting on that, and that is where the SNP could back establishment of a specific committee, or indeed, as part of that Bureau process, consider the Net Zero and Transport Committee covering such a large portfolio. I think that's something that would help, and that is the fundamental point of the committee report. But the committee also came to the conclusion that the government's failure to reach agreement on programme funding was a significant factor in contributing to the delays that we are now experiencing. And looking to the future, the committee is not confident that the funding is in place going forward to ensure completion by 2035, and is calling on the government to be clear with their future funding plans, the timescales for these plans, and to ensure that these funding plans are able to be scrutinised. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Golden. I now call Claire Baker, around 6 minutes. Ms Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd first like to thank the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee for their thorough report. Not only have the committee taken evidence on the petition, they included a reporter from the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee, and they then went on to take an in-depth inquiry, resulting in evidence from such a wide range of government ministers. They started with Derek Mackay and they finished with Mary McCallan. We owe them thanks for the robustness of their scrutiny, their determination to get to the bottom of this saga, and their commitment to exposing the failings and mistakes that have left us sober behind progress. The committee report arose from a petition called Dual the A9 and Improve Road Safety, submitted by Laura Hansler and supported by the A9 Dual Action Group, first brought to the committee in 2022. The petition is clearly driven by safety concerns and expresses frustration at the delay in progress, highlighting the commitment made in 2011 to dual the A9 and calling for a completion of the work by 2025. As we start 2025 and the committee bring this debate, we all recognise what will be the petitioners' continuing disappointment over the timescale of the completion of this project. As the petition says, they wanted to highlight the exponential rate of fatalities on the road, arguing the road is now barely fit for purpose, with an unsustainable influx of traffic on the infrastructure. There have been 52 fatalities between 2011 and September 2022, and more since then. We regularly hear the passion and anger from MSPs in the Chamber about the lack of progress and the lives that are being lost. Families and lives are devastated with every road fatality, and the poor reputation of the A9 is reflected in these figures. A recent FOI also showed there have been 313 collisions between vehicles on the A9, with almost 200 of those on single carriageway. These often cause fatalities, injuries, delays to travel and road closures, impacting on communities and businesses. There is also debate about the behaviour of road users and the state of the road, but the Scottish Government made their decision on that debate when they committed to dualling the A9 from Perth to Inverness, and it should not be a distraction from their failure to deliver on a key infrastructure programme. The commitment to dual recognises the A9 as a key arterial route, which is referred to as Scotland's spine, providing a link from the Highlands to the rest of the country. It is a key route for many businesses and is of vital economic importance to Scotland. The committee report meticulously details the timeline and decision-making. It identifies a lack of leadership at project and ministerial level as problematic. Comparing the A9 to the Queensferry crossing, it argues that the A9 would benefit from a project director solely responsible for the project. The responsible director of projects did oversee several major infrastructure sites, leading to the committee being unclear about the extent to which the A9 was prioritised or whether other transport projects detracted from progress. Furthermore, they raised concerns about lack of ministerial continuity, with 5 ministers in just over 10 years and the transport portfolio frequently being moved between ministerial portfolios and levels. While the former Transport Scotland Chief Executive defended ministers' engagement, no one minister has been tasked with seeing the project through from beginning to end. The committee also identified concerns over future funding of the project. The decision to reclassify the non-profit distribution model in 2014 left a vacuum for a new private finance model, and the delay in addressing this led to Transport Scotland in 2018 telling ministers that 2025 was unachievable. While evidence to the committee argues this was not clear advice and that until late 2022 it was still possible that capital funding would fund the project, the committee do sound unconvinced by this argument, concluding that delays to the decision contributed to an unachievable 2025 completion. Their proposal for a duty of candour being introduced is one that ministers should listen to. The petitioners submitted a petition in 2022 with a belief that 2025 was still a completion date, and it is concerning that by then ministers were increasingly aware that was not deliverable. They also raise important points about the procurement model used by Transport Scotland, which was unattractive to contractors and resulted in single bidders. The whole sorry saga has negatively impacted on public confidence in Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government's ability to deliver major infrastructure projects. As the committee shifted its focus to the 2035 target, while changes to procurement and funding are welcome, concerns remain over poor risk management and transparency of decision-making and information sharing. There will always be factors which are outwith the control of government. The test is how effectively government responds to these. While we can see improvements in communication and ministerial direction, this does not detract from the failure of the Scottish Government on this project, the broken promises to constituents from Perth to Inverness on the projected completion of the project, and the lives that have been lost while progress has stalled. Earlier this week, Transport Scotland published its response to the committee's request to accelerate dualling, saying to do so would risk the 2035 end date. For the communities who have waited so many years, who were promised that the dualling would be completed this year, that response will be another disappointment. The Cabinet Secretary has said the current timetable is robust and practical, but what faith can those communities have given such slow progress to this point? Every delay puts drivers at risk and deprives communities of safe and reliable transport links, and there has to be a guarantee that this timescale will not slip further. This is a serious issue which the committee have robustly scrutinised, and the Scottish Government have been shown to come up short. Not only has the delay and dither damaged Scotland's economy and hindered growth, as well as negatively impacted on communities' well-being, it has also led directly to the loss of life and despair and anguish for too many families. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Mark Ruskell, again around 6 minutes. Mr Ruskell.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I thank the committee for its scrutiny of the A9 petition, and can also congratulate Laura Hansler in successfully getting her petition through the committee and onto the floor of the Chamber. I have met with Laura, and while it's fair to say that we don't agree on all aspects of the A9, where I do agree with her is on the need for investment to make the roads safer. And I also agree that delays in that investment continue to result in crashes, tragic injuries and deaths. And I think in tribute to all the victims of road crashes in Scotland, we should strive to make every dangerous road and street safer and to work towards the objective of 0 deaths on our roads that the Scottish Government has now adopted. Now, over the years that I've served as an MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife, I've also listened very carefully to my constituents about the need for safety improvements on the A9. And I want to use this opportunity to reflect the views of communities along the pass of Burnham to Tay Crossing section. Now, this stretch of the A9 is unique. The hills surrounding Dunkeld and Burnham constrain the pass. They tighten the availability of the space for the road, the railway and the surrounding community. And that wider community, which includes Inver, is severed by the A9 to the point that access to the railway station is difficult and dangerous. And along that short section, there are 8 junctions that serve communities and popular visitor attractions, including the Hermitage. None of those junctions, presiding officer, could be considered as safe. Local people have for many years been fearful of using the A9 for their everyday business. The Dunkeld junction is terrifying, and the aftermath of repeated fatal crashes there has been traumatic for everybody in the community. But I am now told that Transport Scotland officials themselves have been warned to not use this junction when heading north onto the A9 on business. But for the families who live there, they're expected to just carry on and use this junction every single day. That's unacceptable, and solutions need to be put in place urgently rather than waiting for the eventual completion of the dualling project in 2032 for that stretch. Now, a roundabout will be proposed at Dunkeld as an integral part of the dualling programme. That's welcome because saving lives here is far more important than a couple of extra minutes on the journey from Inverness to Perth. And I welcome that orders for the Pass of Burnham to Tay crossing section will be published in the spring this year. But in the meantime, other options need to be pursued. And I gather that officials are looking at interim improvements, and these will be discussed with the local communities in the months ahead. And I would ask the Cabinet Secretary to make sure that this process leaves no stone unturned. And I welcome the many discussions we've had about the A9 in the recent couple of years. We have seen, for example, a temporary roundabout introduced at Ballinluig in the past. A slit road may also be possible within the constraints of the land that's available to ministers. And there are also speed limit reductions and enforcement measures that can be put in place relatively quickly and effectively. Reactivating the A9 safety cameras would also be an obvious improvement. Lighting would be the biggest and simplest change that could be simply introduced. If there's time in hand, presiding officer, I will let Mr Mountain in. Yeah.
Edward Mountain.
Sorry, and I thank the member for giving an intervention. Presiding officer, what I seek is a confirmation from him and his party is that they are signed up to dualling the A9, not just safety improvements, which seems to be what this is about, and roundabouts. So are we up for dualling the A9? Are you signed up to it? That's the question.
Through the Chair, Mark Ruskell will give you the time back.
I thought this was a debate about safety improvements, primarily of which dualling has a role to play. But of course, it's much more, as Mr Mountain will know, than just about dualling, and I'll come on to that later on. Lighting would be the biggest and simplest change that could be quickly introduced at that particular junction. And when recent works were taking place to upgrade gas infrastructure on the A9, the contractors brought lights to the junction for the first time. And local people instantly felt safer because they could see and they could be seen. But when the contractors left, the road fell once again into darkness. So the lights need to be brought back. We also see vehicle-activated signage on other junctions on the A9, warning drivers of turning traffic, for example, at Gloagburn. But why not at Dunkeld? So there are many ways that immediate, low-cost improvements can be made to the A9. When Jenny Garuth was Cabinet Secretary, there were a dreadful spate of crashes post-COVID. But low-cost measures, including signage, lining and lighting, were put in place, and they were effective. But there is a need to maintain and improve that infrastructure. We know that some bollards are weakly lit, line markings are poor and have eroded away, so they need to be fixed. And ask the current Cabinet Secretary to please keep the momentum up on these measures and ensure they're reported alongside the regular project updates to Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee as the whole dualling project moves on. Now, the Dunkeld roundabout solution was discussed as part of a co-created process on the A9 improvements over a number of years with the community. And I welcome that Transport Scotland was really open to this approach. It was innovative, it did result in a number of asks, of which the roundabout was one. But connection to the station was also highlighted, and the opportunity the dualling project presents to reconnect the villages to the railway still needs to be on the table in some form. An overbridge that can blend into the area is desperately needed. And that severance caused by the road has worsened in recent years due to flood damage, and the sight of pedestrians and cyclists attempting to cross the A9, which I have seen myself, really leaves your heart in your mouth. So, presiding officer, I really look forward to further contributions to this debate. I will reflect on wider A9 project issues in closing, but it is clear that on the ground, Perthshire communities on the most sensitive and controversial section of the A9 deserve safety action now and well before the dualling project is completed. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Beatrice Wishart again around 6 minutes. Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I welcome the committee's debate today. I also welcome the committee's final inquiry report and thank all those involved in making it a reality. I also like to say thank you to the original petitioner. This inquiry has proved that the Scottish Parliament is open to Scotland's citizens and public petitions can have an impact. This afternoon I'll touch on some of the inquiry's findings and the Scottish Government's response. At the heart of all this, which should not be forgotten, is that the A9 continues to be a dangerous road, with many, sadly, having lost their lives travelling on it. Communities the length of the route, tourists and haulage vehicles use the roads to get to where they need to go and keep services and goods deliveries across the country running. Swift action to address this matter has been needed for many years, and continuous delays are a failure of the Scottish Government. There are some findings of the inquiry I'd like to highlight and elaborate on. The inquiry stated that the 2025 target for dualling was missed not due to one single issue or incident, but instead the Scottish Government's failure to reach agreement on programme funding. This is thought to have significantly contributed to progress stalling as the programme was reaching the procurement and construction stages. And this might have been remedied with one individual whose main or only focus was to progress the A9 dualling programme. With rapid turnover of SNP Transport Secretaries in recent years, it is little wonder that this was raised as a concern. And I note the Scottish Government's response disagrees with these points. I also note the finding that, and I quote, a lack of open external discussion of the challenges being faced in the delivery of the A9 dualling programme has negatively impacted public confidence in Transport Scotland and its ability to deliver major infrastructure projects within the timescales it says it will. Again, this is of great concern that confidence in a government body like Transport Scotland is being questioned. The Scottish Government has responded to say that the ability of Transport Scotland to deliver has not been negatively impacted. This seems to be a misreading of concerns about confidence in the body. There will need to be significant effort ploughed into addressing the public's confidence in Transport Scotland, and I hope the Scottish Government will take that on board. There needs to be particular attention paid to addressing the confidence in Transport Scotland for the north of Scotland, as completion of projects in central and southern Scotland before the completion of A9 dualling points to a confidence deficit for those northern communities, as picked up by the inquiry. Scottish Liberal Democrats welcome the inquiry's proposal of routine and regular sharing of information with Parliament as a key way to address concerns about the transparency of decision-making on major projects such as the A9, and I welcome the Scottish Government's agreement in principle to this. And if I may, Presiding Officer, slightly outside of the inquiry, the A9 north of Inverness is also a critical road for the communities it connects. I recognise that work on safety issues by Transport Scotland covers the whole of the A9, and it is important that assessments are regularly made, as we know the vital importance it has in ensuring access to public services. Before I conclude, the importance of the A9 in connecting up large parts of Scotland means that improving safety on the route should be a priority for the Scottish Government. Dualling the road will help with that, and a new report by the Scottish Government to accelerate this is welcome. I also note that the Government expects to complete work on the £5 million programme of additional measures to enhance safety on the route in advance of dualling by March this year, and after so many missed, this deadline does need to be met. So to conclude, Presiding Officer, progress on the A9 needs to be realised swiftly for the safety of communities up and down Scotland who use the route. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Emma Roddick, to be followed by Edward Mountain, around 6 minutes. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. You don't have to wander very far in Inverness or strike up many conversations to find somebody who has a lot to say about the A9 dualling. And I admit to being one of those people, and I thank the members of Petitions Committee for their work in scrutiny and putting together this report, giving us all the opportunity to discuss this today. And of course to Laura Hansler, who is a constituent of mine, for lodging the petition, and her wider work locally, which I am of course familiar with. Accidents on the A9 have a huge impact on the communities along it. Not only have dozens of loved ones lost their lives, but every time there is an accident, people sit and worry that the person who is on their way home may be stuck in traffic or maybe in an ambulance. So like everyone else, I want to see accidents avoided, livelihoods supported and lives protected. The fact that 2/3 of respondents to the committee's question on what the strategy should be moving forward said to just dual as quickly as possible, regardless of disruption, really demonstrates the strength of feeling and urgency that exists for this project. And I know that's something that will not be lost on the Scottish Government, given that I and MSPs from all different parties and regions have been passing on comments, both from those that we represent and from ourselves, saying just as much. And that is what must now happen, the delivery of a dualled A9 from Perth to Inverness as quickly as possible. And while I do like to focus on the now and the next, and I think that progress is far more important than recriminations, it is absolutely right that a committee in this Parliament has taken to scrutinising past delays. That's not only undoubtedly useful for future large projects, but I hope that it will help to reduce the likelihood of future delay to this one and build resilience into the plan from here on out. Because not everything can be foreseen, like COVID and Brexit, but how events are reacted to and how they are dealt with does make a difference. And delays like the incredibly disappointing one on Tomatin Tamoy, which came about due to procurement issues, were, as the report states, avoidable. And decisions on funding allocations can be done with greater speed than what we've seen, given certainty to all involved in delivering the programme. And there's a strong sense in the Highlands that there has not been transparency in the process. People have been let down, and the government was not upfront about the timescale slippage as quickly as it could have been. So I agree with statements in the report on the need for honesty and that duty of candour. 2 years ago, I told a previous minister that trust had to be rebuilt. Now, there's a lot of trust still to be rebuilt, but I certainly feel like mine is steadily growing. And that is in large part due to the approach of the Cabinet Secretary, because on the A9 and the A96, her actions have aligned with her words. I've found her approachable and honest, and most importantly, as I've seen on recent journeys, there are spades in the ground on the A9. The new safety web portal is also a great resource, and I recognise that the £5 million programme of interim safety improvements is to be completed by March. Already I've noticed a really positive difference, particularly around Dunkeld and the Slough. So my focus now will be, along with colleagues, continuing to attend those regular meetings with Transport Scotland and the Cabinet Secretary to oversee progress and raise those issues that constituents are still bringing to me, and making sure that my voice is one of those that sees the forthcoming process through. And I think this report gives us a really good foundation as to what those expectations should be. I'll be driving the A9 on Saturday. I am a fairly loyal train user when it comes to going back and forth to Parliament, and I like to keep my car in the Highlands, but sometimes, due to the timings of work commitments, train timetables, or just needing to carry more than I can on my own, there's not another option. And that's the case for a significant number of people who are driving on the A9. As long as Central Belters keep inviting us to morning meetings, we're going to need to drive there. And when I do have to drive, I will plan my whole week around not doing it at night, because there are places that can feel dangerous. However sensibly and responsibly you drive, you cannot control the actions of others. So on Saturday, I expect to see multiple examples of terrible driving, which is of course not unique to the A9, but you do plan on the A9 for those cars which choose to overtake dangerously or getting stuck on a winding bit of single carriageway behind somebody who's doing 45 and braking at every average speed camera. Now, my concern for the dualling of the A9 is not based on a belief that all roads must be dualled, but it's because I know that this particular road design impacts the way that it is used. The frustration that builds and the confusion for those who are not familiar with it when you swap from dual to single to dual to single just doesn't lend itself to a safe journey. And many on the A9 are not familiar with it. They may not even be familiar with UK roads. So it is important that we make it as easy as possible to drive that road safely. So I'll return in conclusion to those whose lives have been most badly affected by accidents on the A9. My heart goes out to everyone who's been impacted, and I firmly believe that the best way to honour those lives which have been lost is to see the dualling complete. So I look forward to seeing that as soon as possible.
Thank you. And I call Edward Mountain to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury. Again, around 6 minutes. Mr.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And everyone's reminded us why we're here this afternoon, which is the simple reason that we're discussing a target which was promised a long time ago to dual the A9 by 2025. And because of the petition that was raised by Laura Hansler to get that considered in the Parliament. And I'd like to thank Laura, as everyone else has done, for the time and the effort that she put into doing that. I'd also like to take this moment to thank the Petitions Committee for allowing me to attend their meetings and for giving me a fair chance to question all the witnesses. I am extremely grateful, especially considering the amount of questions that I was given by the convener. So thank you, convener, and thank you to the committee. I am, like many people, a habitual user of the A9. I'm up and down it every week. And unlike Emma Roddick, I can't always achieve the not travelling in darkness. Sometimes on a Thursday evening when we've sat late, I will travel up the road in darkness and in doing so, in a certain amount of trepidation. And I would just say that the claims, when I put my claims in for my mileage, sometimes, well, they've given up questioning me why the mileage is up and down each week, because sometimes, quite often, I end up going by Dundee, having gone halfway up the A9 to find it closed. And that is a problem that everyone has to face. So, when was this promise made to dual the A9? Well, the promise was given in 2011. It's a long time ago. And when it was made by Alex Salmond, who came and gave evidence to the committee, I think he seriously got it. I think he understood the need to link Scotland together by linking all of their cities to make sure there was a free flow of trade between them. And when he came and gave evidence to the committee, I think on the 8th of May, we were given two foolscap documents of information that had been provided on his behalf. Now, I sat down and waded through those documents and came up with a particular document that I thought was relevant, which was a meeting between him and Alec Neil on the progress and how it was going to be carried out. And I started referring to it, and I got halfway through it, and he'd already told me the date that it was on and what it was about. So he was in fine fettle when it came to the information and the facts and figures, and he was truly impressive on his detailed knowledge of it. And I was actually impressed, and I came away at the end of that thinking, if he'd been there to see it through, it might have actually happened, because he understood the need for it. But there were lots of people that came after him who didn't understand the need. I mean, there was Stuart Stevenson. I could go through the whole list. Let's do that. Keith Brown, Derek Mackay, Hamza Youssef, Paul Wheelhouse, Graham Day, Jenny Gilruth, Kevin Stewart and Fiona Hislop, although she's now moved on from being a minister to a cabinet secretary. And we have had a couple of first ministers who didn't seem to understand it in the form of Nicola Sturgeon and Hamza Youssef. And I will in a minute, if I may. And of those people that didn't get it, I'm sort of the impression today from the debate that we've had and the question that I've asked, I don't think the Greens have understood the need for dualling the A9 between Perth and Inverness. Cabinet Secretary, I will give way to you. Cabinet Secretary.
He reflected that actually Keith Brown was a Transport Minister between 2010 and 2018. Alec Neil led in 2010 to 12. And when Nicola Sturgeon came in, it was Keith Brown that took over lead responsibility. He wasn't called to the committee to give evidence, but his written submission, which I have read, is very interesting to give a perspective. You might want to acknowledge that there was continuity of Minister for Transport or not, albeit not always lead responsibility for the A9.
Edward Mountain, I'll give you the time back.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I absolutely accept there was a continuity of changing cabinet ministers of transport when it became too difficult to justify the jobs they were doing. And I've read the Cabinet Secretary's response to the committee, which I guess I am as disappointed as with many other people, in the sense that it talks about certainty and transparency. All I can say is since this promise was made to dual the A9, a more clever way of obscuring the information, a more deceptive when it came to actually when it was going to be delivered, and a bigger list of broken promises I don't think I've ever come across. So I'm afraid, Cabinet Secretary, I am disappointed in your response. It's almost to say, nothing to see here, it's all changed, move right along. Well, I don't accept that. I don't accept that for Highlanders and for the constituents that I represent. I also would briefly like to say that during the whole process of this, I'm concerned about the role of Transport Scotland, who seem to think themselves above scrutiny and above the government. Now, I know my time is short, Presiding Officer. I want to just say one or two people have suggested that it be a separate committee. Now, I've convened both the REC committee, which dealt with transport, and the Net Zero and Energy and Transport Committee, and neither of those committees have had time to deal with transport properly. So my plea to the next Parliament is set up a committee whose sole job is to deal with transport and infrastructure. So I know that I've probably used all my time. I would just say, Presiding Officer, the delays continue to cost lives. I don't need to remind people that between the period of 2020 and 2024, 168 lives have been lost. So I appeal to this government, speed it up, and frankly that response from Transport Scotland on the cross-party plea to speed it up was a bit of a joke. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Faisal Chowdhury to be followed by Fergus Ewing, around 6 minutes. Mr Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Like all my colleagues, I would like to start off by thanking Laura Hansler for bringing this petition to the Parliament. I joined the Citizen Participation and Public Petition Committee in 2023. Shortly after this petition was first considered, I joined members in thanking the clerks and many stakeholders who gave evidence to the inquiry. Much has changed since the original petition was lodged with the committee in 2022. But one thing remains, and that is the A9 has not been duelled. And death on the A9 sadly remains too common. Through this debate, we must not forget that is the reason why this project is necessary. We heard in both in written and in person evidence that the 2025 target itself was not considered by the officials or ministers to be unachievable. Alex Neil, who had responsibility for the project in 2021, said that target was perfectly feasible. And other ministers said the project remained a priority for the Scottish Government. So where did it go wrong? The committee found a number of factors played a role in the 2025 target being missed. I want to focus my remarks today on the funding model of the project, the management of the project, and proposal for a memorial to those who have lost their lives on the A9. Regarding the model of funding, we heard from both late Alex Salmon and Mary McCallan, there was always the expectation of a mixture of public and private financing. But the following the reclassification of the NPD model in 2014 as public financing, it was not clear how financing the project would be achieved. Transport Scotland warned ministers in 2017 of a diminishing window for a procurement strategy to be agreed. But a few funding model would not be established until, the new funding model would not be established until 2019. And a discussion paper from December 2021 shows a decision on financing was still to be made. Rather than decide funding and make clear the 2025 deadline would be missed, ministers failed to decide it at all. Uncertainty seems to have contributed to the delays we have seen and is a consistent theme for this inquiry. My next point involves the management of the project. Unlike the Aberdeen Peripheral Route or Queen's Ferry Crossing, which had project directors, there was no person with single responsibility for duelling the A9. Given the other capital projects and ministerial churn will remain factor regardless of timescale, having one person to drive the project forward could be greatly beneficial and allow challenges to be resolved more quickly, which, as we have seen, slowed progress previously. While A9 is a very large project, this is something that should be considered moving forward. The petition which sparked this inquiry called for a national memorial to be created for those who lost their lives on the A9. That petition closed with over 4,000 signatures. In our call for views, we heard dueling of the A9 should come first, and that would be the best memorial. But we also heard that bereaved families should be listened to. The petitioner told the committee the proposal came from communities and people who have interacted with the A9 dueling campaign. A memorial to A9 death or road deaths in general could provide great comfort to those who lost family or friends. And in recognition of the pain caused, the committee recommended a memorial to be considered and consulted on by the Scottish Government. Looking to the future, Presiding Officer, the committee's report makes a number of recommendations, but all come down to ensuring transparency. If trust is to be rebuilt, the Scottish Government must be upfront with the challenges being faced and what progress has been made. I hope the Scottish Government considers the recommendation from the inquiry, so we are not sitting 10 years from now having the same debate. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Fergus Ewing to be followed by Jamie Halker-Johnson. Around 6 minutes. Mr Ewing.
May I too thank the clerks for their assiduousness and helpfulness and patience, and pay tribute to Laura Hansler, who has been dogged, determined and indeed indefatigable. Presiding Officer, when I was a boy in my youth, my mother Winnie was particularly famous in Scotland, and I used to be asked repeatedly going around with her, Fergus, are you going to go into politics and follow your mother's footsteps when you grow up? And I would always be inclined to answer, no, I won't. I want to do a proper job first. But here we are. It was back in the 1990s, I think I can trump everybody here on the grounds of longevity, that I moved to the SNP conference that the A9 be duelled. So I've got a bit of baggage here. And we have heard from many people across the chamber about the sad loss of life on the road, and I have lost friends, and it is devastating for every family involved. The tragedy doesn't just affect them for a short period, but for the whole of their lives. And that is something I think we all recognise, irrespective of the views that we have. I do think that because the Scottish Government have so manifestly failed, and I was part of it for a while, so although I was never responsible, I can't elide myself from responsibility. I say that in all candour. I did speak behind the scenes and try to influence things, but was unsuccessful. I obeyed the rules and didn't speak out. I think I may have made up for that in the past few years. But I want to be honest, because I know the Cabinet Secretary herself is determined to do what she can, and I admire that. It's genuine. I can feel that. I think we all can. But with respect, I think a little bit more humility in the response to the request for acceleration would have been seemly, and it's not too late for the Cabinet Secretary to put that right. I want to focus on one major, very serious issue, partly technical, and that is that, in my view, and it's based not on my expertise, because I don't claim to profess any, but on what I've learned from speaking not only to Graham Barn, who's been a fount of wisdom, but also to many other people in the industry, the civil engineering industry, and that is this. The current approach of proceeding one by one with traditional procurement, I think, is not only going to fail in the future as it has in the past, but bears with it very obvious, foreseeable risks, and risks that can't really be gainsaid. For example, every one of these processes involves 3 or 4 companies putting in bids once they get in the shortlist. It costs hundreds of thousands of pounds. So the unsuccessful ones have lost a hell of a lot of money. Secondly, the profit ratio is only about 2 or 3%. And thirdly, these companies, as we've heard, and it's been mentioned by Jackson Carlaw in his opening statement, all have an unprecedented level of other work. I could go through it all, but by my tally, it actually amounts to over £60,000 billion. This is unprecedented. Now, if I was one of the big companies and I was looking around for what I do, I would want to be sure I can make a good return. Don Fanucci in The Godfather put it well. He said, everyone needs to wet their beak. And that's facetious, perhaps, but it's true. So if I can make 6%, why on earth would I go for 2%? And why would I carry the greater risks that the contracts returning only 2% offer? Secondly, experience has shown that these contracts haven't really performed timelessly. I said in an intervention earlier, Tomatin Tamoy was announced just before the 21 election, and that was very welcome. But it's not going to be completed to 2028. Well, that's 7 years. There are 8 remaining contracts, 8 sevens of 56. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen and that we won't see it done until 2080. But you see, the current way we're doing it, Presiding Cabinet Secretary, I believe, is flawed. And I do think it's exacerbated by the fact that there is this plethora of other work. Now, I'm told, and Graham Barn gave this in evidence to the committee in his oral evidence in June 23, I'm told that a framework approach is really far preferable in order to get things done. That is that 3 or 4 companies, perhaps, or more, be on a list of approved contractors and they're all guaranteed work for a period of 8 or 10 years or 12 years. That approach actually is pursued by Transport Scotland. Amy and Bayer, they've got framework contracts for 8 years with an option to review for 4. So why not use it for the main tendering for the major project? SSE have got 7 contractors on theirs. Network Rail have got 3. Scottish Water, I believe, use the framework as well. From the company's point of view, they're guaranteed work for about a decade. That means they don't have the problem of a contract finishing and nothing to fill its place, which then leads to people being hired and fired. It leads to reduced costs because they can buy materials for the next contract ahead as well as the current one being done and build up long-term relationships with their suppliers. So it seems to me that we shouldn't, Cabinet Secretary, go on making the same mistake again. Somebody once said, never make the same mistake twice when you can make them 5 or 6 times and be sure of it. Well, this is almost guaranteed, Cabinet Secretary, to lead to delays. Not necessarily in every one of them. If that happens, then any residual faith in the Scottish Government in the Highlands will be utterly shot to pieces. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I want to make an offer to the Cabinet Secretary. Please reconsider the request for acceleration. I make this in all seriousness. Consider it with industry who don't appear to have been consulted. And in conclusion, I can quote the Godfather himself, Vito Corleone. Cabinet Secretary, I've made you an offer you should not refuse.
Thank you. I call Jamie Halcrow-Johnson to be followed by Emma Harper.
Oh, goodness, Presiding Officer, for that. Can I, as others have done, thank the committee for all their work and their clerks, and of course Laura Hansler for her work, her commitment to this vitally important cause. And this is undoubtedly a very important debate, both for myself and for my constituents. but it's a disgrace that we're having to have it again. And it's a shameful indictment of this government's abject failure to deliver on their promises to my constituents. And at the beginning of 2025, the target date for delivery, we should be preparing for the final stretch of dualling to be completed. Instead, we're here in Parliament, listening again to excuses from the Scottish Government on why it's not. Many of us on these benches and the stalwart campaigners, some of whom I think are in the gallery today, have been campaigning to get this road dualled between Inverness and Perth for far too many years. My colleague Murdo Fraser and I launched our campaign for the dualling as far back as 2006, when we were both young, fresh-faced and full of hope. That should give you an idea of how long ago that was. Our petition then attracted, I think, well over 20,000 signatures and clearly encouraged or played a role in the SNP, including that in their manifesto in 2007. But here we are, 18 years later, still waiting. And I've been using the A9 all of my life. I still just about remember heading up the old road on the way home to Orkney via the Keswick ferry and the long and winding route up to Scrabster. And there have been real improvements since then, new bridges and new stretches of dualled road, 25 miles of dualled A9 between Inverness and Perth between 1979 and 1997 under the Conservatives, and 12 miles between 2007 and 2022 under the SNP. And while that undoubtedly made the journey shorter and safer than it was, the SNP promised us a fully dualled A9 between Inverness and Perth, and a safer road. But travelling on the road last year, particularly during the summer, it felt as though almost every journey was disrupted by an accident. Now the inconvenience of a journey delayed, yes, but worse, sitting in stationary traffic as emergency services passed or the air ambulance flew over, desperate to get as quickly as possible to the scene of another accident. Sitting in the car with the fear that just ahead another incident may be serious enough that another family or community will have to be told of the loss of a loved one. Too many have already lost their lives, and too many will probably experience that in the next few years. But, Presiding Officer, we didn't need to be here. Of course, all major projects face challenges, issues with the terrain or economic factors, as others highlighted, and that must always be considered. But dualling A9 is not some engineering marvel. It is, put simply, building a road where there is already a road, and it should not challenge, as it has done, the abilities of a country with the engineering heritage and expertise of Scotland. And what galls most about this shameful saga is the dishonesty of the Scottish Government, as has been highlighted already. I think the communities most reliant on the road could have accepted some delay to the project had real progress been made or even been obvious. But time and time again they were told by SNP ministers or by SNP MSPs, quoting SNP ministers, that all was fine, all was on track. The dualling will be completed as promised by 2025. Nothing has changed. And that deception went to the very top. During his budget statement to this Parliament on the 15th of December 2022, I asked John Swinney, then Deputy First Minister and Acting Finance Secretary, and I quote, "Will the Cabinet Secretary finally admit what my Highlands and Islands constituents and his Perthshire constituents know, which is that the promised dualling of the A9 between Inverness and Perth will not be completed in 2025 or indeed any time soon?" He responded, again I quote, "The Government's position on the completion of the dualling of the A9 remains intact." Now, that response may, to some people, possibly more charitable people to me, be acceptable if, even ignoring the evidence of his own eyes and the lack of progress on the dualling, John Swinney was still naive enough to think an engineering miracle could happen and the project could still be completed as promised. But that was not the case, because more than a week before John Swinney gave me that response here in this chamber, the Scottish Government had been told that the dualling would not be completed by 2025. An email had been sent which said, and again I quote, "It should be made clear that the current published completion date of 2025 will no longer apply to the programme." And that email was sent directly to the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney. So when John Swinney told me in this chamber that nothing had changed, that was not true. He knew the 2025 date would not be met, but he kept the deception going that it would. John Swinney, the then Deputy First Minister and now First Minister, misled this chamber when he said the SNP promised to dual the A9 would be delivered. And if John Swinney is confident
that he didn't mislead this Parliament and mislead the communities and campaigners who will have heard his comments, then he should refer himself to his own newly appointed independent advisers on the Ministerial Code, surely confident that they will clear him of any breach. Of course, I doubt he will, because this government doesn't do accountability or transparency. And even when they knew definitively that the duelling would not happen as promised, they refused to be honest with this Parliament and with the public. And as has been the case far too often with this government, the ferries fiasco being one very obvious example, no one has lost their job. Presiding Officer, this has been a shameful saga. Endless broken promises, deadlines missed, communities lied to, lives ruined, and of course lives lost. Too many families who now mourn the loss of loved ones on the A9. So my message to the SNP government is simple. No more failures, no more excuses. Get the A9 duelled.
Thank you. I call Emma Harper, the final speaker in the open debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate, and I thank the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee members and the clerks for producing this report. I also, of course, join with members in congratulating petitioners, including Laura Hansler, for their tenacity in furthering improvements and the duelling off and wanting the duelling of this critical route, the A9. And I too, like others, welcome Laura to Chamber this afternoon. Members will no doubt be aware that in my South Scotland region I have championed the need for significant improvements to the main arterial routes in the South West, the A75 and the A77. These roads connect Scotland with Northern Ireland, Ireland, England and wider Europe. And I know how much commitment, dedication and work it takes to champion road improvements. This is partly why I wanted to speak today, Presiding Officer, as many issues that have been uncovered in the Petitions Committee's inquiry, these issues have been uncovered and addressed in their inquiry into the A9 duelling report, and those are mirrored elsewhere. Presiding Officer, the A9 and all our roads must be safe, reliable and resilient. Members have described their experience of driving the A9 and specific hotspot parts, or not spot parts even, like the Dunkeld Junction, for example. The magnitude of the investment and the complexities of upgrading infrastructure at this scale in this financial environment have been and will continue to be considerable. But this is a challenge that the Scottish Government is committed to meeting, and Cabinet Secretary has described in detail the status of the contracts that are under procurement and the contracts that are about to be procured as well. The Scottish Government anticipates nearly 50% of the A9 between Perth and Inverness will be operating as a dual carriageway by the end of 2030, rising to 85% by the end of 2033 and 100% by the end of 2035. And I'm sure campaigners will welcome the progress. The former Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewan has brought up an interesting issue about frameworks and frameworks for contracts, and it was interesting to hear Mr Ewan's comments on that. It is clear that A9 duelling will sustain and improve the quality of lives in the rural Perthshire and the Highlands and beyond. And Emma Roddick has described really well the challenges for drivers on the A9. I've been there myself, not very often though. Those people that are not familiar with the single track lanes, and then it becomes dual. And I'm sure that many people who are visiting the Highlands area have experienced quite that gasp in their mouth when they are trying to cross the road or even drive north or south. The report says that improved safety is expected from A9 duelling, and this is crucial with a forecast of less fatalities and less serious injury casualties each year. Driver stress and accidents will be reduced. Journey times for emergency vehicles will also be reduced, increasing the survival chances of those in need of this urgent emergency care. These benefits will be transformative for a route that serves 35% of our land mass and carries around 10% of Scotland's GDP in terms of cargo. Presiding Officer, it is really important to consider safety of our roads. This is of paramount importance. One life lost on Scotland's roads is one too many. It is welcome that the Scottish Government is committed to achieving safer road travel in Scotland now and in the future. And the Scottish Government does not accept road casualties are inevitable, and it is vital that we continue to work to bring overall casualty numbers down. This is important for our roads, including the A9. Improvements are long overdue, and it would be remiss of me not to make a call again to the Cabinet Secretary to progress at pace the recommendations contained in the Scottish Government's STPR2 in relation to the South West main arterial routes, but also looking at how do we progress at pace the A9 as well. So, Presiding Officer, in closing, the Scottish Government has demonstrated its commitment to dualling the A9 and progress is being made. And again, I thank the committee members and the clerks for undertaking this inquiry and the witnesses who provided evidence. And I look forward to the Cabinet Secretary's response. Thank you.
Thank you. We move to winding up speeches. Members may wish to know we have a little time in hand, and I call on Mark Ruskell.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I thank members for a pretty reflective tone, actually, of the debate here this afternoon. A number of members have reflected on the original decision going back to 2011, and certainly I acknowledge the fact that that decision was made, that dualling of the A9 is a priority of this government and is clearly a priority of most parties in this Parliament as well. But I would sort of invite members to look at some of the history about how that decision was made as well, because it's important to reflect that on the original business case for a full dualling project of the A9, that business case failed. It didn't meet the right cost-benefit ratio. It didn't, and that included safety measures at that time as well. So ultimately, this was a political decision that was made to prioritise a full dualling programme over and above other road building projects and other transport projects that communities were calling for across Scotland. And we are simply where we are today. Whether a full dualling of the A9 would pass the test today, particularly given the objectives that we've got in the National Transport Strategy, which are weighted towards safety, which are weighted towards connectivity and economic growth, but also weighted towards climate, I think is a question. But we're beyond that now. The scrutiny here today has been very much about how this programme will be delivered in the years to come. I think a number of members have spoken about the importance of dualling, and I do recognise that it has a role. I'm somewhat disappointed that very few members have spoken about the related importance of junctions and junction safety as well, which I think is as important. And I would also point to some of the evidence that the committee had from stakeholders, which particularly highlighted the figures from 2023, highlighted the figures from 2023, which showed that the collision rate on dual sections of the A9, the currently dual sections of the A9, are actually higher than the non-dual sections of the A9 per kilometre. And that's just something that we need to reflect on. Dualling is not a complete solution. Give way to Mr Ewing.
Fergus Ewing.
Many thanks. My constituent Chris Miller and Laura Hansler have worked tirelessly on safety measures. I didn't have time to cover them today, but they are absolutely essential. But could I ask the member this? The Road Safety Foundation has found in evidence that the chances of dying in a road traffic incident on a single carriageway trunk road are 10 times greater than that on a motorway, and 3 times on dual carriageway. And that's before one considers the additional complexities of the A9, with its rapid oscillation between dual and single, and indeed 2+1. Doesn't that prove that Highlanders are at greater risk of dying than people in the Central Belt? And doesn't that make in itself a case for giving us the same expectation of safety as Central Belt dwellers?
Mark Ruskell.
Well, I would reiterate, maybe Fergus Ewing didn't hear, but I would reiterate the point that I made, that if you look at 2023, the number of collisions on dualled sections of the A9 was actually higher than non-dualled sections. So it's a complex picture. I'm not discounting the fact that dualling has a role to play, and that the switch between non-dualled and dualled is highly confusing and results in accidents and issues. But I think we also have to recognise that there's a bigger picture here as well. And I don't know if Mr Fairley will be concluding this debate, but Mr Fairley will know that in the section that is continuously dual between the Keir roundabout and Dunblane and Broxton, we've seen high traffic speeds before average speed cameras were brought in there. We've seen a number of serious issues at junctions where there have been deaths, there have been collisions, there have been tragedies over many years in southern Perthshire on a dual section of the A9. So I would simply ask Mr Ewing and others just to reflect on the fact that this is not a simple dualling versus non-dualling. This is a complex issue. Junctions, the way that communities use the road is important, and it's important we get into the guts of that and take some of the heat out of this and look at some of the light of the experience that communities have. I'd like to just sort of reflect on a couple of other points as well. So, a number of members have spoken about, and I welcome the committee's report's focus on the need for scrutiny and the need for transparency. And I think Mr Golden reflected on the words of the former First Minister about the need to be candid about that 2025 date. And I think there has been confusion around that. I think for a number of years, Mr Ewing thought that it was the Scottish Green Party that was actually delaying the A9, not with that particular road. But there is a need to really shine a light on this, and I'm pleased that Edward Mountain, as our convener of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee, is here. I think the committee has done a great piece of work on scrutinising the progress of the ferries 801, 802. There could be a case for us to look in more detail at this, particularly as the briefings start to come through, and for us to sit on some of the issues around delivery and some of the concerns that communities have. So that scrutiny, that transparency is hugely important. I'm also interested in some of the discussion, some of the contributions from Fergus Ewing and the committee convener about, effectively the competition within the road building sector and within other industries as well, not just for funding, but for engineers and expertise in order to deliver pipelines of projects. And there's a familiarity there because I've heard the same concerns being voiced by the rail industry, who again need certainty, but they also have subcontractors that are looking around other sectors for where they can sustain work going forward. So I think that is something, an important theme for this Parliament to reflect on. The government's response to potentially rescheduling the various contracts does need some more unpicking outside of this chamber. I recognise that there may well be some substantial supply chain impacts in reordering that, and that brings in risks in terms of price. I don't think we've been able to unpack that in this debate here this afternoon, but I do think that's the kind of area of analysis that the NZEC committee could get into. So, Presiding Officer, I'm going to close there just by saying that I think it's been a useful debate here this afternoon. Obviously, our thoughts are with communities that suffer from the underinvestment in the A9, and we look forward to safety improvements going forward and the delivery of those. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also start by paying tribute to Laura Hansler, who is the petitioner to this petition and has worked for so long in working to get improvements on the A9. And can I also thank the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee for their report. They've really shone a light on the broken promises and mismanagement of the project to dual the whole of the A9. And despite this, the Scottish Government kept repeating a promise they knew would never be kept. And the lack of honesty and transparency with the public and the Parliament in that was breathtaking. And because of this, the committee recommends a duty of candour. This must never happen again. We must have regular updates on progress and timelines so that we can't be hoodwinked for decades. The committee recommends that there should be a committee with the sole responsibility of oversight of major projects. It was the case with the Queensferry crossing, and it surely should be good enough for the A9 as well. Many speakers talk... Yeah.
Cabinet Secretary.
Just for a point of factual accuracy, there was a separate committee, I understand, for the Queensferry crossing for the legislative aspects of the Queensferry crossing, but the monitoring thereafter referred to the relevant committee.
Rhoda Grant.
And that should be the case for the A9, because there are many aspects to the A9 that would really benefit from having a committee look at that and monitor progress. And a large number of people talked about the loss of life on the A9. Emma Roddick very graphically described the dangers of driving the A9. Faisal Chowdhury and Claire Baker also talked about the large, unacceptable numbers of fatalities. And every one of them brings heartbreak for their family. They're not numbers or statistics, they're human beings who have been at the heart of their communities, and they're a loss to them as well. And that's why Faisal Chowdhury mentioned that Laura Hansler, the petitioner, is really keen to have a memorial to these people. And maybe if we have a committee looking at the A9, they could also lead progress to make sure that we have a memorial for those who have already lost their lives. Claire Baker talked about the economic impact the A9 is having on the far north. And Jackson Carlo also spoke about the amount of organisations waiting for this to be dual, because SSE and others, those involved in renewables, need to use the A9 to operate those projects. And Fergus Ewing, to an extent, turned that on its head by saying that those projects that are happening that are going to require a huge workforce, one would be much more attractive to those that might bid to complete the A9, and they will also all be competing for the same workforce. So there is a real risk in actually not trying to speed up the timing of the A9, because if the development coincides with these developments, it may force prices up as well as slow things down, because there is a lack of a workforce. So I would ask the Cabinet Secretary to look at that again. And Emma Roddick highlighted that most of those who responded to the Petitions Committee were really keen that the timings be sped up. The committee, when they were looking at this, have been told that the main reason for delay and not meeting the 2025 deadline was funding. Faisal Chowdhury pointed out that the NDP funding route, they knew it wouldn't work as far back as 2014. Claire Baker told us that the government had been warned by Transport Scotland that there would be a delay in 2018. And Fergus Ewing laid out the timeframes that those decisions are made, in that the Moy to Tomatin stretch of the A9 could take more than 8 years from procurement to build. So now it becomes quite obvious to us that it should have been known a decade ago that the promised timeframe would never be met, and yet it took until 2023 for that to be admitted, and indeed COVID was blamed for the delay rather than admitting that the delay had come into place a long time before that. There may be delays ahead, because the Cabinet Secretary herself said that she wasn't sure about the MIM contract working, and they have got contingencies. But again, if it's funding, that builds a delay into the 2035. Yep, I will.
Cabinet Secretary.
I might refer to my opening remarks. That absolutely does not, because that is the point about providing that assurity in terms of funding that I made in my opening statement.
Rhoda Grant.
Well, I'm grateful for that reassurance, but I hope it doesn't, given past experience and funding mechanisms leading to the delay that has already taken place. Mark Ruskell and others actually talked about safety and improvements, and I think it's important that we have those in place. But roads are there to mitigate risk to drivers, and it's really important that we have a dual carriageway, because that is the best form of mitigation. Now, Beatrice Wishart and others also talked about the A9 North, and I know that's not part of this debate, but we need to make sure that safety considerations are put in place for the A9 North. It is blocked on a number of occasions, and imagine being pregnant and in labour and being driven over 100 miles to Inverness maternity unit from Caithness and coming up against a road closure. It's partially closed at Scrabster one of the main ports and economic drivers in the far north. So we need to make sure that that is not ignored to protect the economy of Caithness. Presiding Officer, we were hoping to celebrate the opening of the dual carriageway between Inverness and Perth this year, and Highland communities have been badly let down. The government need to level with people. They should stop hoodwinking them with promises that they know they cannot keep, and they need to pull out all the stops to deliver this by 2035 or indeed earlier.
Thank you, and I call on Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start, as others have done, by thanking the committee, thanking its convener and its members for the assiduous work they've done on this important topic that affects my constituents and many other people throughout Scotland. Thank those who gave the committee evidence, and in particular thank the petitioner, Laura Hansler, as others have done, for the assiduous way she has pursued this as a citizen, using the processes of this Parliament to raise such an important issue. My colleague Maurice Golden outlined his experiences on the A9. My history on the A9 goes back many years. Growing up in the Highlands, I can just about remember what we call the old A9, which wended its ways through towns and villages, taking forever to make a journey from Inverness to the Central Belt. And the new A9, as it was known, which was built in the late 70s and early 80s, was a vast improvement on what was there before. But what we've seen in the intervening period is traffic levels have, I think at the last count, expanded 5 times compared to what they were when that road was proposed 5 decades ago. And that just shows there is a need for continual improvement of the infrastructure. And the case for progressing this dualling is unanswerable. Rhoda Grant talked just now, as others did earlier, about the lives lost and the tragedies we're all familiar with on the A9 because of people being killed when their lives could potentially have been saved in other circumstances. I'll give way to Pauline McNeill. Oh no, she's disappeared. I think that might be an error, Presiding Officer. I'll carry on. Every fatality is a tragedy to the family involved. Every serious accident carries with it horrible consequences for those involved. And there is also an economic cost to this, because the road is closed. There's a cost to the emergency services. There's a cost to the economy. And as we saw recently, and I wrote to the Transport Secretary about this, where you have diversion routes, because the road is closed, as it was recently when the road was closed near Ballinluig, you see diversion routes that end up getting clogged up, as the route from Kirkmichael to Pitlochry was. Locals get stuck in jams, sometimes 2 to 3 hours, unable to move, because HGVs are trying to pass each other on a very narrow road, totally unsuitable for that to be used as a diversion. And that causes even bigger concerns and potentially even more serious consequences should there be another accident and should there be a need for emergency vehicles to get through, which they simply cannot do because of the suitability of diversion routes. So there are all these knock-on consequences from the very high accident rate we see on the A9. Now, we know, and we've heard this throughout the debate, there was a promise made that the A9 would be dualled by 2025, a promise that was broken. And Maurice Golden referred to in his remarks the pretence that was kept up by the Scottish Government over a period of years that that promise could be kept, up until 2023. Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, I think, was very striking in the evidence he gave about the dishonesty on the part of some in the Scottish Government. He quoted something that the current First Minister said to him in this chamber in 2022. And that's a very serious matter, Presiding Officer, should it be the case that the current First Minister has misled Parliament and misled my colleague when he answered that question, if the information available to him was otherwise than what he stated to Parliament, and that matter needs to be properly investigated. Yep. Emma Roddick referred to in the report this issue of a duty of candour. I think that's a really important aspect of the committee's report, where we expect ministers to be straightforward, open with Parliament in terms of where we go forward. I hope the Minister listens to that. And in an afternoon where we've heard a few quotes from the Godfather, Mr Ewing, I'll give you this one from Michael Corleone. I respect those who tell me the truth, no matter how hard it is. I think people in Parliament would rather hear the truth, even though it might be uncomfortable for ministers, Presiding Officer. So we have seen people let down. And just to put into context what's happened over the last 18 years, 11 miles of the A9 have been dualled in the last 18 years. 11 miles. When we had a Conservative government responsible for roads in Scotland, going back to the period between 1979 and 1997, the same period of 18 years, that Conservative government built 62 miles of dual carriageway, which puts into context the very slow progress that we've seen. So we now see a new pledge to complete the dualling by 2035. I hope that is a pledge we can trust, but I have to say I think we'll believe that when we see it on past record. Now, there have been calls, and there were calls in the committee report, for an acceleration of the timetable of dualling. The convener of the committee was his usual diplomatic self when he referred to the government's response to that call as disappointing. And Edward Mountain used similar language. I think it's worse than disappointing. I think it's dismal, presiding officer, that that is the response we're getting from the government. Now, of course, there is an issue of capacity amongst civil engineering companies in Scotland. The convener referred to that. But I agree with Fergus Ewing in his powerful contribution, making a reference to the need to avoid this sequential approach to placing contracts and the danger of slippage that presents. And I would rather see a framework approach to contracts as he proposes, because that way I think we avoid the risk of this vital work being put back even further. Mark Ruskell was a little bit coy, I think, about the Greens' commitment to dualling, but I do agree with him on one point, and that is about the need for short-term improvements. And it's an issue that I know he has raised and I have raised too, because we shouldn't see these as optional extras. You know, we can progress dualling, but at the same time recognise there are short-term improvements that could be brought in now, improvements to lighting at junctions, improvements to signage at junctions, potentially improvements to road layout at junctions. And that would help avoid accidents and save lives in the short term while we wait for that vital dualling to be completed. And there is another issue nobody has touched on that has been raised with me by constituents about the blighting of properties along the route. Properties who are unclear, unsure where exactly the route is going to go because of the delay there has been in bringing forward project plans, individuals unable to sell their property because they're unclear whether or not it will be affected by the route of the road. And that is something, another impact on the lives of individuals that the Scottish Government needs to be conscious of. And finally, presiding officer, let me just touch on this issue of a dedicated cross-party committee. I thought Edward Mountain, as convener of the NSEC committee, made a really important point, that his committee simply does not have the time and capacity to properly assess these issues. And although the Cabinet Secretary said this is a matter for Parliament rather than for government, we shouldn't forget the fact that the SNP as a party have a large number of votes on the Bureau of Parliament. If they decided themselves this is something that should be pursued, it is within their own gift talking to other parties to make it happen, and I hope they will. Yeah. So in conclusion, presiding officer, we have a government that has failed us. We have a broken promise, and I fear we currently have a lack of urgency about where we go from here. I'd urge the government to listen to everything that's been said today, listen to the committee, and listen to the petitioner, Laura Hansler, and get on with this vital work before more lives are lost. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. I have listened very carefully to the range of points raised during the course of the debate today, and I too reflect, I think as we all do, on Maurice Scaldon's contribution on the impact of fatalities on families, but also on local communities as well. Before I turn to address other points made by MSP specifically, I'll want to address and highlight the strategic importance of the delivery plan that the Government announced in December 23, which was the first ever published delivery plan that set out those milestones and those dates and those actions that will take forward that delivery progress on the A9. And also I will comment further on the progress achieved and expected in the year ahead, because we are getting on with those actions. And I do so absolutely learning the lessons of transparency and certainty. Edward Mountain seemed to be surprised that I focused on transparency and certainty in my opening remarks, but I did so because that's what the committee had as its themes and its recommendations for improvements. And while I'm on Edward Mountain, I also would say that his point about the work capacity of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee I do reflect on, and that was before we had land reform obviously allocated to that committee. So a future Parliament may want to consider looking at transport and infrastructure on those points. I've named them. I'll take them.
Edward Mountain.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary to give away. The Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee has to speak to 3 Cabinet Secretaries, a Deputy First Minister, and doesn't have time to do transport if you take in all the other ministers that we're supposed to see with all the other work. Does she therefore, having said that and agreed that with me, support the principle that the next Parliament, in the next session, should have a committee purely designated to deal with transport? By that I mean roads, ferries and railways.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think if you listen to my last points there, I did say that there actually is a merit in transport and infrastructure. It would be for a new Parliament to decide where it might want to go, precisely because of the workload issues. This delivery plan that we produced in December 23 was developed to balance 3 key factors: market capacity to both bid for and construct the projects making up the A9 dualling programme, disruption to road users and challenging financial constraints. And the delivery plan provides much needed certainty for road users, local communities and the construction industry on when works are expected. It transparently identifies key milestones when critical decisions are required to progress with procurement or make contract award, and it identifies when dualling works on individual contracts are expected to become operational. Now, the delivery plan was and continues to be supported by a Cabinet decision to prioritise completion of the A9 dualling programme within its budgets, and it remains the focus of the Government to complete the A9 dualling programme in line with that plan. In terms of progress, in addition to the significant milestones that have been achieved that I mentioned earlier, a number of advanced contracts have also been procured for work such as ground investigations. These advanced contracts are each important in helping to de-risk the main construction contracts. Now, the Government has also taken steps to engage with interested parties. In January 2024, a briefing was held for MSPs, and in February 2024, a stakeholder briefing was held in Inverness, followed by a public exhibition which visited Inverness, Aviemore, Dalwhinnie, Pitlochry and Perth. At the end of February 2024, the dedicated A9 dualling website was launched and quarterly newsletters were issued in spring, summer and autumn of 2024. In November 2024, the first of what will be regular updates on progress was issued to the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee, and a briefing for MSPs was held in December 2024. And on that point, that was where there was extensive discussion with Fergus Ewing on framework contracts, pros and cons, and I hear the points he's raising during this debate on framework contracts. We discussed that at that December 2024 meeting. I am prepared to continue that conversation, but in the spirit of candour, I cannot imply that it is appropriate that it will definitely happen, but I understand in terms of the plan. We want to go ahead to provide certainty with the plan that we have, but I am open to those discussions, and on that point I'll open to Fergus Ewing.
Fergus Ewing.
I'm grateful, but can the Cabinet Secretary just confirm as a matter of fact that the plan and the scheduling announced in December 2023 was presented as a fait accompli? There was no consultation with industry about it, just as there was no proper consultation, such as a market day, with industry in relation to the consideration of the request for acceleration. And that failure to consult with industry is potentially a very fatal flaw to the deliverability of the programme.
Cabinet Secretary.
On that point, I think it's wrong for Fergus Ewing to imply that somehow Transport Scotland have produced the December 2023 plan and don't have continuous, regular engagement with the industry to identify capacity, because that's part of the work in identifying what would be sustainable with that. And I want to move on to some of the points that Jackson Carlo made as well in my remarks. But I do want to look ahead. I want to confirm that made orders will be published tomorrow for the Crewburnmore to Kincraig project, which will mean that made orders will have been published for 92% of the length of the A9 dualling programme, and that might address Murdo Fraser's points about issues for properties. Other significant milestones on the A9 dualling programme that the Government is working towards during 2025 include commencement of statutory procedures for the Passive Burnham to Tay Crossing project and commencement of main construction works on the third contract to Matt and Tamoy, both in spring 2025, and contract award of the fourth contract, Tay Crossing to Ballanoog, and commencement of procurement for the fifth contract, Pitlochry to Killiecrankie, both in summer 2025, and concluding the process of further decision-making on the use of MIM in late 2025. So achievements of these milestones will represent a very real practical progress. To Mark Ruskell, he raised issues around Dunkeld. He knows that I am very alive and active in terms of discussing that with Transport Scotland as what might be possible. Of course, remember that roundabout was not part of the original proposals, but in discussion with the community, again, that was a co-created response to the request there. In parallel with this work, the Government will progress towards completion of its £5 million package of additional engineering measures intended to address the perceived contributory factors to collisions. And to Beatrice Wishart, these measures are expected to be completed in March this year. The A9 Safety Group will continue to meet, and also there's a new A9 Safety web portal that I would encourage everybody to access. We'll continue to have engagement plans. There will be a briefing in Perth in May, early June, and also that regular committee response and updates that I indicated earlier. Jackson Carlo, I think, made a very important point about capacity of workforce. I have met with SSEN, not just obviously on the A9, but actually across Scotland, and not just on roads, in terms of capacity for the renewable sector. And that's where that careful consideration, that engagement of workforce capability, and that's why the points the committee make about certainty is easier to plan. And that's why if there are chopping and changing, reordering, rescheduling, that doesn't provide the certainty. And so therefore it's that balance that we're going to have to seek in terms of delivery on that point. He also assumes that acceleration would allow increased capacity. It might do the reverse, and that's the point that's been made in the report this week. It could risk the issues on workforce and indeed compound things and then inadvertently cause delay. Faisal Chowdhury made a number of points around funding, and again I'd refer him to the remarks that I had made earlier. Presiding Officer, I'm conscious that I'll need to bring my remarks to a close. I want to reiterate my commitment to providing transparency and certainty on the progress of the A9 dualling programme as it moves forward in the months and years ahead. I would encourage members to take advantage of the regular updates, briefings, sign up for the newsletters, publicise that to their constituents, and so that they can remain informed in the progress of this vital programme of work. I think the committee did that job of scrutiny. It did look at the past, but it did make recommendations going forward. I've been in post 18 months. I was part of the work to bring forward that December 2023 published plan, and I am very, very conscious of my duty of transparency and indeed accountability and scrutiny to this Parliament, and I take those responsibilities very, very seriously, and I hope I've evidenced that in what I've said today and also in the actions that I've taken today, as was reflected by Emma Roddick. And with that, Presiding Officer, I'll bring my remarks to a close.
Thank you, and I now call on David Torrance to wind up the debate on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As Deputy Convener, I am pleased to close an important debate on behalf of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee, and I thank colleagues across the Chamber for their contributions this afternoon. I'd also like to offer my many thanks to committee clerks and to Spice for their assistance along the way. This was an in-depth inquiry involving a number of complex issues, and their contributions to the process was invaluable as always. Thanks must also be given to everyone that took time to give evidence to the committee, ranging from individuals, organisations, community councils, through to Cabinet Secretaries and former First Ministers. All these submissions were key in helping to inform our work and scrutiny for the petition. The A9 is a key arterial road, often referred to as Scotland's spine, linking the Highlands with the rest of the country. In addition to being a popular tourist route, this trunk road is a key economic route, helping to ensure the delivery of essential supplies to rural communities, and is likely to see further increase in volume of traffic as investment and growth, particularly in that aligned to a national transition to net zero continues in the region. I also speak as someone who regularly travels the A9, though perhaps not as often as those like Emma Roddick, Fergus Ewan, Murdo Fraser or Edward Mountain or Jamie Howard-Johnston, who have shared their own experiences and those of our constituents of a tragic and terrifying collisions on this route. As others have done, I would also like to commend the petitioner, Laura Hansler, for a pragmatic and persistent approach she has taken to pursuing this important matter. Over the course of this afternoon's debate, we have heard about the impact the failure to dual A9 has had on communities across the Highlands and rural Perthshire. This frequently occurs in the form of long diversions and delays each time the road is closed to allow emergency services to respond to an incident. Situations which are not only frustrating for those relying on the road to get around, but as others have highlighted, now spark a sense of dread into those living in the closest to a road, that the sound of sirens means another life may have been lost. While much of our inquiry and contributions we have heard today have focused on the practicalities of the dualling programme, it is also important to reflect the petition's call for a national memorial. And the committee's recommendation 160 states that the committee recommends that the Scottish Government consults on the proposal for a national memorial. We know that the primary motivation for dualling the A9 has always been addressed as road safety concerns on a route that has developed a reputation as one of Scotland's most dangerous roads, and we heard from Emma Harper, Maurice Gold and Mark Russell in their speeches today about this. Since its open to traffic in the late 1970s, more than 330 people have died on the section between Perth and Inverness. The majority of these fatalities involving a head-on collision of vehicles. We heard from road safety experts that the dual carriageway roads can vastly reduce the risk of head-on collisions, as they tend to involve the use of barriers preventing crossover and the configuration of junctions to allow traffic to move safely to join and exit the road. During the course of our inquiry, 11 people lost their lives in incidents in A9. A powerful reminder to all of us just how essential it is that a dualling be completed. On behalf of the committee, I extend my condolences to all those who have been impacted by fatalities on this route, and urge the Government to work with Laura Hansler and others on a proposal for a lasting memorial to those who have been injured or killed on the A9. We have also heard compelling the dualling programme as quickly as possible with a fitting tribute to those who have lost their lives on this route. And without repeating the points many of my colleagues have, like Foswell Chowdhury and Emma Roddick, have made this afternoon, I'd like to focus on the remainder of my remarks on the key theme which ran throughout the inquiry: how the programme is funded. The evidence we heard there had from the outset always been an expectation that a mix of capital and private finance would be used to deliver a dualling of a programme. A key difficulty arose in 2014 when a non-profit distribution model was reclassified as public rather than private finance. And while progress on statutory progress at this stage meant no immediate decision on procurement was required, documents we received indicated that by 2017, officials were impressing on ministers that they need to agree a procurement approach that would ensure that the 2025 target date would remain achievable. By 2018, the options being presented to ministers indicated that, without a readily available alternative to NPD, a fully capital-funded approach would be required to ensure that the programme remained on track for completion in 2025. Of course, we now know that a combination of issues, including challenging and financial circumstances, delays to agreeing a suitable procurement option, and the availability of upfront capital to progress the dualling resulted in the admission from the Scottish Government that the 2025 target was no longer achievable. As others have commented, the Government has now published a revised delivery plan which suggests the A9 dualling will be delivered within the original estimated £3 billion. The Cabinet Secretary has spoken of a Cabinet decision to prioritise completion of the dualling programme within the Scottish Government's budget. This information the committee has tentatively welcomed, and I say tentatively because while the Scottish Government refers to certain in response to our recommendations, the clarity on funding for A9 dualling, we are very well aware that the procurement of the north and central section using mutual investment model contracts is subject to ongoing due diligence and further decision-making expected later this year. As our report set out, we remain concerned about what will happen should this due diligence determine that MIM contracts are not suitable, and continue to seek clarity from the Government on what contingencies are being made to put in place to ensure that the funding will be available when it needs to be and that a 2035 completion date will not be negatively impacted by any change in approach to procurement of the remaining sections. The Cabinet Secretary also referred to a need to follow annual budget practices, which we acknowledge, but I think should be left in no doubt following contributions from Fergus Ewing, Murdo Fraser, Rhoda Grant, Emma Roddick and many more, that members across the Chamber will be knocking at her door and the Finance Secretary's door if funding is not in place to deliver a swift completion of the A9 dualling programme. In an area covered by a convener, Maurice Golden, and many other speakers this afternoon, we believe that transparency is essential to rebuilding the public confidence in this programme. I very much welcome a commitment from Transport Scotland to provide 6 monthly updates to both Net Zero, Energy and Transport Committee and to other interested members of the Scottish Parliament on progressing of the dualling programme, as was the commitments from the current and former members of the Scottish Government on the importance of parliamentary scrutiny. Routine and regular sharing of information is key to addressing concerns about the transparency of decision-making on major projects such as these. To enable the scrutiny to take place, we recommend that, in addition to 6 monthly updates from Transport Scotland, that the Cabinet Secretary also provides statements to Parliament at key milestones aligned to a delivery plan published in December 2023. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, no one wants to be standing here in 10 years' time still discussing this issue. As you've heard from myself and from the convener, we strongly believe that enhanced parliamentary scrutiny has an important role to play in driving momentum on this programme. The level of engagement with our report on today's debate demonstrates the appetite of members to undertake the scrutiny, and I look forward to working with colleagues throughout the remainder of this Parliament and perhaps the next to support the effort and ensure a commitment to fully dual the A9 between Perth and Inverness is successfully delivered.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on inquiry into the A9 dualling programme. It's now time to move on to the next item of business. And there's one question to be put as a result of today's business. The question is that motion 16085 in the name of Jackson Carlaw on behalf of the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee on inquiry into the A9 dualling programme be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. That concludes decision time, and we'll now move on to members' business, momentarily in the name of Tim Eagle.